Very cool.
How are you guys doing? Where are you guys talking to me from?
I'm in California, Sacramento.
Okay,
I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio.
nice. Well, I'm in Portland, Maine.
Okay, so
Right
we're
on.
all over the place.
All over the
Hey,
map.
are
Yeah.
those the AKG Mark IIs you've got on, Ryan? The headphones?
What are these? I'm in a podcast studio that I rent. Hang on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly what these are.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Yeah, they just recently went on sale. I'm totally gonna pick some up.
Yeah, so I lived in New York for like 15 years, and my wife and I moved here in 2018 because we have a little kid, and it was just cheaper to not be in New York. And I just rent office space whenever I need to do stuff like this. And there's this great
well,
the
that's
guy
nice.
actually that rents my office space is a huge Star Trek fan. So we were actually gonna watch some with a buddy of mine. We're actually gonna watch some Lower Decks for my birthday
Very
in a
cool.
couple days.
And
Yeah.
your anniversary was yesterday.
Yeah. August is a
Happy-
big month for me. Yeah, thank you.
Happy anniversary, man. How many years?
6.
That's excellent. That's
Yeah.
excellent. I'm coming up on my 9-month anniversary.
All right. You just got married?
I did on Halloween. We had a Star Trek Lord of the Rings wedding.
Sick. Yeah. Are you married? Big J.
I am not currently married. Right now I'm engaged to
Congrats.
who will be my. Well, thank you. I didn't learn my lesson the first 2 times. This is going to be my third
Engagement?
third marriage.
Nice.
So yeah. So wish me luck that maybe I get it right this time.
Well, Patrick Stewart has been married 3 times.
Okay. Well,
This is
Patrick
quite
Stewart's
true.
been married 3 times.
Red alert.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Beyond Trek Podcast. I'm your host, Dag. In the room with me, I've got Big J and special guest, author and journalist, Ryan Britt. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for being with us, Ryan.
Thanks, guys. This is already fun.
We've only been here for like 11 minutes.
Yeah.
We are here today to talk to Ryan about his latest book, Phasers on Stun, How the Making and Remaking of Star Trek Changed the World. If you've been following along with the podcast, you can know that, me and Jay are gigantic adherents to the lore of Trek. So you would definitely be surprised to know that there was a whole lot in this book that none of us knew, which is amazing. Because there was a lot of stuff in here. I'm like, oh yeah, you're going to talk about, Majel Barrett. You're going to talk about, the Cage and the cancellation and Lucille Ball and all that stuff. I was like, yeah, I expect to see that in there. But there was a whole lot in here I didn't know about, and I'm happy to have this book.
And that's hard to have happen with us.
What was one thing you didn't know? That shocks me.
There is.
Let me read my notes here because just one thing I didn't know. Yeah. Just the drama about Saavik.
Oh yeah.
I knew the whole baby thing that was in the book. That was, obvious. But the way that you frame it in a sense of like, yeah, we just ditched Saavik as a baby mama and poof, we're done. And I was like, man, that framing, that goes there. The whole Nichelle Nichols starting up the NASA let's get people of color and women in here, that was something that was totally off my radar. There's a whole lot of book references in here I didn't even know were written, so now I have a backlog of books I need to get.
You didn't know
Yeah.
about the NASA thing and name the shuttle Enterprise?
I knew about the Enterprise, but I didn't know that Nichelle started like a recruitment drive and basically got on the board of like the National Space Institute. Was that
Yep.
what the name of the organization was? I didn't know about that, and now I'm just like, man,
Oh.
what an iconic person, man.
You mentioned Saavik. Oh, sorry.
I'm saying at the time of this recording, Nichelle has been passed for about a week, and it has definitely impacted the lore. But reading this book and seeing that is just, heartfelt love.
It is, and I was just going to raise a little tidbit about Saavik for our listeners. It was originally intended for Saavik to be in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. Valeris was actually supposed to be Saavik, and I believe Gene Roddenberry, who's good at nixing good ideas, brought down the axe on that one as well.
Well, Big J, you know what is that? What Robin Curtis told me, and this is in the book, is that it was actually Majel who brought down the axe. Yeah, is
It
that
was.
that's what Robin Curtis told me. The Robin Curtis thing, so Saavik, interviewing Robin Curtis, who played Saavik in Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 4, was one of the biggest revelations of the book. A lot of fans are probably like, why'd you spend so much time on Saavik in that one chapter? And the answer is because I was just really, Robin Curtis was so generous with her time, and like in the physical book, Dag, as you've seen, and I got a lot of photos from her, some candid photos from when Nimoy first cast her and stuff like that. But yeah, she said that if it couldn't have, that Majel was like, if it's not going to be Kirstie Alley and it's not going to be Robin Curtis, it can't be Valeris. That's what Robin Curtis said. There are conflicting accounts of that, and even Robin Curtis sort of hedges on saying like, I don't really know what happened, but you know, I
do recall they did not want a third actress playing the same character.
They didn't want a third Saavik, and then you know, Kim Cattrall takes kind of credit for naming Valeris, which is also sort of interesting. And then Nick Meyer kind of like throws up his hands, is like, what happened? And then Robin Curtis is like, well, I would have done it. She wanted to do it. She was like, I would have loved to have worked with Nick Meyer. You know,
why didn't she do? Why didn't it?
Because Majel, the Roddenberrys, as you say, Jay, like the Roddenberrys got involved and were like, it can't be Saavik. It'll be too much of a betrayal.
It would have been the best. Like that would have just changed the entire scope of the movie and of that plot.
Yeah,
and the politics of that movie, it would have been spectacular. But it's just, that's frustrating, is you hear about these great ideas that have come and gone and been chopped by the Roddenberrys.
I don't mean to turn this into like the Saavik show, but if she had done that, Saavik would have been like, Saavik would have been in the perfect place to be Valeris, because she had those the whole Star Trek 3 dealings with the Klingons. Her friend David dies, and you know the books go into like a burgeoning romance in them before David's dad's best friend bangs Saavik. But anyway,
but there's a deleted scenes from the Wrath of Khan that Meyer filmed that intended for David and Saavik to have a romance, you know. And I say this in the book, but that what's so interesting about David and Saavik in particular, and Merrick Buttrick, who the great late actor who played David, is that they were really set up as the new Kirk and Spock in a way, right? But flipped, because Saavik was on the command track in the Wrath of Khan, and David was scientist. You know, so it was inverted, and they were the next generation. You know, here's Spock's protege, and she's kind of a hothead like Kirk, and here's Kirk's son, but he's like a scientist, you know, and a little bit more distrusting of Starfleet. So Robin Curtis, you know, told me in the book that, you know, not only did she negotiate for 3, 4, 5, and 6 when she was hired, you know, but that, you know, as Dag mentioned before, they had intended, Harv Bennett told her, you have to visit the Vulcan, obstetrician, because Saavik's gonna have a baby, and she showed me the telegram of him saying that. You know what I mean? So like, and that I mentioned that in the book. You know what I mean? And so like, they were intending for Saavik to have Spock's baby in 4, and they never filmed it. You know what I mean? But you know, the only remaining evidence is that when she says, you know, David saved Spock. He saved us all. Yeah. Saved us all. You know, so and I thought you should know. You know what I mean? And so that's the only remaining thing you get there. But yeah, I quote her in the book saying this, that they kicked her to the curb. Saavik just gets left on Vulcan, and that. But the funny thing is all of that is still there. There's nothing in canon that says Saavik didn't have Spock's baby.
Right.
True.
Right. And
there is nothing that says that Spock didn't then later go back and raise.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot.
They just kind of act like it never happened. Nothing ever happened. And
well, and they act like it never happened, but they don't explicitly say it didn't happen. They don't explicitly say it did happen. There's room for it to have happened. And if you look at the larger context of things, like, Spock isn't necessarily abandoning Saavik on Vulcan to have that child. He's got to race back to Earth and face trial and give testimony in defense of his friends who are about to lose their careers. That's...
Well, yeah, and I say this in the book too, but there's a you know, Picard went to the wedding of Sarek's son. He says that in The Next Generation, and then a novel later sort of said that, well, that was Saavik and Spock.
Yeah.
Oh, so maybe, nice.
So maybe Spock
Which son?
Well, I don't think.
Well, did Saavik come back?
No,
come back. Yeah,
Nope. So much missed
travel back in time and go to Saavik's wedding.
Oh man, that's
so
not
much
unreasonable too.
That's not
Picard
unreasonable.
totally could have traveled back in time and attended the wedding, because time travel is just one of those things you do.
Picard's time traveled in the 21st century twice now.
Yeah.
There's Picard in 2024 and Picard in 2063.
He could have left
You're right.
He could have left a text message for himself in 2024 that his past self would pick up in 2063.
I mean, how many Kirks and Spocks are there in the 20th century?
Oh Jesus!
If we want to go with
Let's not
fourth dimensional time jumping, it's a little bit wow. I'm building a PowerPoint right now to explain to a lot of people who are getting introduced into
how many datas are there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
God. Yeah, that's too much.
Yeah.
And I thought it was bad with how they kept trying to bring back Eobard Thawne in The Flash. If you ever watched that show.
Yeah, no,
Jesus
you're right.
Christ.
Yeah. It's like, or I was going to say like Doctor Who or something like that. Like, how many captains?
Yeah, how many times can you do this?
So, Ryan, you are all over the place in pop culture. You seem to have taken a special delight in, superhero fandom, science fiction fandom. You're on tour. You're on the Geek podcast. What's the one behind the Geek? Den of Geek. That's it.
Well, I'm on the website. I write for Den.
You write for Den of Geek.
Yeah, and Inverse.
Ooh.
Yeah. I started at Tor. Yeah, but Inverse and Den of Geek is my big gigs. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just like embedded in the lore of all of these things. Where does Ryan come from, and how did he get involved in being a writer?
Yeah, so the short answer is, like many people that fall into writing nonfiction, I never thought I wanted to be a nonfiction writer, right? Like I always thought I wanted to be a fiction writer. So the short answer is, when I was 23, I moved to New York to become a writer, from Phoenix, Arizona, Tatooine, Vulcan, Arrakis, take your pick. But I moved from Phoenix, where I'm from, to New York to become a writer, and I immediately started doing story slams at The Moth, which now The Moth is like this big nonfiction podcast where people do stories, and it's very famous, but at the time it wasn't. And I just found that I could do personal essays on stage, and it really prompted me to write. And then from there, I just started writing a lot of nonfiction. I started getting nonfiction published, started doing personal essays. And then I kind of parlayed that into writing for, you mentioned the publishing blog, Tor.com, TOR, which is a part of Tor Books. And I kind of was cut loose blogging about science fiction back in 2010. And I did that for a long time. I was a staff writer there. And then that kind of just led to doing more criticism, movie reviews, TV reviews. And then, and that allowed me to do my first book, which was an essay collection, Luke Skywalker Can't Read, in 2015, which is a book that now I look back on and I was very optimistic about the Star Wars fandom at the time, because it was right before The Force Awakens came out, and some of it is a bit dated now, but I like my optimism when I go back and read it. And I had a lot of Trek commentary in there. And then when by the time Discovery was getting going in 2016, like we were hearing about it, I had been doing a lot of essays on science fiction and fantasy for different places, and I had been hired at Inverse as a staff writer, and so I was doing a lot of really early journalism for both them and for Den of Geek. Like the second Nicholas Meyer was hired by Brian Fuller for Star Trek Discovery. People forget that happened. It happened. I had a correspondence with Nick Meyer for a number of years, even at that time, because I had interviewed him for a piece I'd written about Sherlock Holmes. So I would get little tidbits from him, and so I did a lot of really early reporting on Discovery, and then I just kept doing. I became a little bit more serious about Star Trek journalism after 2017, because I was it was almost like at the time that Discovery aired, there was so much controversy about it by the time it came out, that there was almost this thing within geek media, and I don't want to name names, but there was almost this thing with colleagues I knew at other publications that they were just already ready to hate it. It was Brian Fuller had quit, and there was all this confusion about the, like, how it was going to be distributed, and people were just angry. And I just kind of was like, you know what? I'm going to take this one episode at a time, and I'm just going to report on it and just to have fun with what I can have fun with it on. And as a result, I ended up being a very big cheerleader for Discovery, and I got to interview everybody. You know what I mean? And so then that kind of just kept going. And as Discovery kind of got better and better and better, like, I was just so glad to have been there at the beginning. I was just talking to Rainn Wilson the other day, and I was like, Rainn Wilson was like my first Discovery interview, when he played Harry Mudd. And so yeah, I don't know. I think that and then sort of like now the fandom is sort of like, that was only 5 years ago. You know what I mean? It was hard to believe now that we only had the one new Star Trek show at that time. Yeah. And now it's like, so that's just been nice, because it's just created more work for me at those kinds of publications where I can kind of be the Star Trek guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, being the Star Trek guy then kind of led me to be like, oh shit, I want to do something else with there's a lot you don't get to use, when you write online articles. So then I was like, I'd like to do, something bigger.
You were
led to the book. Yeah.
You were talking about the hate of Star Trek Discovery before it even aired. I'm wondering where that series ranks among all the Star Trek series that were thoroughly disliked before they even aired. I would have to say that one seems like it was kind of up there. Now, when TNG was going to come out, I was 10, and I do remember that there was excuse me, a whole lot about, well, it's not Kirk and Spock and McCoy, I'm not watching it, this is bad. And really every series has had dislike before even coming on TV, and I seem to it seems like Discovery is probably the most hated unaired or before airing Star Trek series.
Maybe. I think that you're right, Jay. I talked to Jonathan Frakes. I've talked to him many times, but in 2018, people forget that Jonathan Frakes directed the first Discovery Mirror Universe episode.
Yep.
Right, like after they came back from the mid-season break and then they were in the Mirror Universe, that was Jonathan Frakes that directed that episode. So I remember talking to Frakes about this in 2018, and this is in the book, is that he's like, yeah, I could see what was happening to them, the Disco cast, is what happened to us, meaning the Next Generation cast. So I think that you're right. And yeah, in the last chapter of my book, I get into all the cycle of backlashes, right? That like go, and how they kind of eventually sort of go away. But yeah, I think that what I always say is that you don't find this as much with UK Trek fans, because at that time, Discovery was on Netflix. And so and Discovery was on Netflix for a while. You know what I mean? It's only been kind of recently that the Paramount Plus thing kind of disrupted that, and then all the European fans got kind of screwed. And when they could of watching Strange New Worlds and stuff like that in real time. Yeah. So
when I heard Netflix was, they basically bought the international distribution of Discovery just based on it was Star Trek, but then after what they got in that first season, they were pretty pissed about the whole deal, and that the short treks were kind of used as a let's sell some stuff to Netflix to make some money. They saw that first season and was like, this is horrible, we're not doing this, we are cutting the deal completely. So there's that little tidbit. But I just got to thinking again. So TNG, you had, it's not Kirk and Spock, I'm not watching it. Then this show's on the space station, nope, not watching it. A woman captain and they're lost somewhere, not watching it. A prequel series, forget about it, not watching it. So
yeah, well, I think that with Discovery, and I like Discovery, and I have a special spot in my heart for it because of everything that I've said, but I think that I don't know as much about the Netflix deal in terms of the internal machinations.
Right.
You probably know more about that than I do. But what I will say is I think that had Discovery come out on a different streaming platform in 2017, had it just been on Amazon Prime in the States, or had it just been on Netflix, I don't think that you would have had that. There was this built-in thing in the media at the time that was just like, oh, and I hate this new streaming service. And it's like, that's fair, I get it, but it's like there's this weird platform.
It was all Paramount Plus had at the time.
Well, it was CBS All Access then,
right.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
But my point is that there's a platform bias that is like really pervasive and weird, because I'm like, well, whatever. Like if suddenly like all the Marvel shows suddenly jumped ship and there became a new Marvel's only streaming service, everybody would pay for it. It's fine.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But for some reason, there was something that was really nasty. And I think it was just kind of like, it was almost like a trend. It was like, oh, well, that's too much. It's like the price of a latte. Like, what's the deal? You know, so I think that like, and now Paramount Plus is kind of good. You know what I mean? Like now they've got a lot of stuff, you know, that's not just Trek. So I don't know. I just think that there was something really nasty in the media at that time.
I wonder if it was because of UPN and
Maybe.
Voyager is a United Paramount network. They took the chances of Voyager being on Fox, like TNG and DS9 was, widely larger network. But then Paramount decided we're going to do our own thing. We're going to do UPN. And right now, Star Trek is our only show. Then we're going to add wrestling and all this other ridiculous crap. So I'm thinking it might have been something like that because it started out as on a comedy about Abe Lincoln's Black Butler, things like that on the UPN. And
don't forget about MacGyver and Q. Come on, who can forget Legend?
Oh yeah, that's right. So I wonder if that was, and you're right, it's the whole thing about every freaking company has their own streaming service now. We have done full circle back to what it was when we had cable, and the reason we cut the cord. Now we're back. Any show like this show, I have to pay for Hulu, but I like this show, I have to pay for Amazon Prime. Oh, I want to see this show, now I've got to get Netflix. It was like that with cable. There's this one show I like, but I have to get the next tier up of stuff, and that's kind of what was happening there. But
I want to switch gears.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears. Ryan, the ultimate question, are you a Trekkie or a Trekker?
I'm a Trekkie.
You're a Trekkie.
And as I say in my book, I think that the generation before me were Trekkers. Because those were the people, there's a lot of quotes in my book about this. In the chapter, The Trouble with Trekkies, is about, the pioneers, the Jacqueline Lickenbergs, Deborah Langston, the people that were there and organized the first conventions in 72, 73, 74, 75, 76. They felt that Trekkies was was pejorative, right? And for their generation, it was. But I don't think it was later. You know what I mean? So I can respect.
We took it back.
I can respect that for those fans, that is the thing that was insulting, but it didn't stick. You know what I mean? It just didn't stick the way Trekkies did. And Trekkies, at the point at which Denise Crosby makes those documentaries,
yep.
I think it's kind of like, it's Trekkies. You know what I mean? I tend to default to saying I'm a Star Trek person or I am a Star Trek fan. I try to avoid it altogether. But, phaser to the head, I say Trekkies. Just because it's just like, and I say this in the book is because I think that it represents both. We talk a lot about how important Star Trek is, and how socially it's important. But something I really tried to do in the book is also be like, that's Star Trek's cultural relevance is why it's important, but it's not necessarily why it's popular. It's popular because it's fun and it's cool, and it is extremely influential on the cool aspects of other science fiction. So Trekkies to me captures the fun in a way that Trekkers doesn't. And again, this is all in the book, but that's my personal take. But at the same time, I'm like, people are like, don't call me a Trekkie. I totally get it.
Trekker seems like maybe, I don't want to say hardcore because there's certainly hardcore fans that are Trekkies, but you're right. It seems like Trekker is more of that generation behind us. And was because to get us started off, you had to go pretty hard in the paint to get Star Trek to be, you had to take it seriously.
Exactly. Yeah. And in science fiction, and early Star Trek fans were also bullied by existing science fiction fans. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so it was like, the nailing down the coinage of Trekkie is hard, but in the book, it's sort of, I can kind of trace it to like, somebody writing about Star Trek fans at a New York Worldcon, a science fiction convention for the Hugos, and that was sort of like a pejorative being used against those Star Trek fans that were kind of had embedded themselves. So because of that, they made their own conventions. They were just kind of like, and I have a lot of fans of that generation quoted in the book talking about that. And so I think that that's part of it. You know what I mean? Is that
Yep.
yeah, but like I thought it was cool. For me, when I was like a kid, I liked saying that I was a Trekkie. But yeah, Jay, I'm like your age. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like 7 when TNG came out. So like for me, it was like Trekkie.
Yeah, that's what we call ourselves. We were okay with Trekkie.
Ryan, in this book, you pour what I feel to be a lot of love on highlighting and spotlighting the ethnic, cultural, and even the LGBTQ plus contributions of Star Trek. In your research, just in general, and also in focusing and preparing and writing this book, were there things about those paradigms that, sort of, I may have to clarify how I want to ask the question, but like these are technically today the paradigms that a lot of people would call the woke, and I'm just wondering, like, did your preparation for this book make you feel more woke?
Well, the way I'll answer that question is that the chapter called "The Pride of Starfleet," which is about the history of LGBTQ plus representation in the Trek franchise, was both the most rewarding chapter to write and the most challenging and heartbreaking chapter to write, because that research, and you can actually tell when you look in the references in the back of the book of just like how much background research went into that. It wasn't just like finding existing interviews that were easy to track down, or existing Star Trek books, or interviewing primary sources, which I also did for that chapter. It was also about finding like, many articles and op-eds from 10, 20 years ago to sort of trace exactly how much the franchise kind of failed the queer Star Trek fans kind of prior to Discovery, and then even in the Discovery era, like how that was kind of mismanaged and misperceived. So, and then the other thing is that I had some friends and fans in the community that did sensitivity and authenticity reads on the book, on both the stuff about LGBTQ plus representation, but also about Black representation in the 60s. So I had colleagues that basically gave me really honest feedback about, this comes across this way, this isn't quite right, I don't think that an LGBTQ plus reader will respond to this, you might want to think about revising this, those kinds of things. And that's part of writing any book with a major publisher, is that you take those steps. But with this book, my editor and I were really serious about taking extra steps there. So I would say that I believed that through the lens of Star Trek, I was a certain degree of aware or woke or whatever you want to say about some of these sensitive issues. But after collaborating with some folks that, these people are paid, right. You know what I mean? It's not like they're doing this for free, it's a job, they're hired to do it. So I felt, just more aware and more in touch with those things that I perhaps wouldn't have been had I written an article by myself and had one person edit it, you know what I mean? Because it was a longer process and we took more time. So, and I would say that chapter in particular was, it was the most painful. It was the one where I didn't really joke around as much, because it was probably the most serious chapter. That in chapter 4, which is about Nichelle and George in the 60s. And so it was important, that's chapter 3. It was important to get all that right. But yeah, I mean, I always knew that there was some paradoxes with representation in Star Trek, where it's both great and
right,
sometimes not so great.
Right. Well, you've had the ability to interview a massive amount of people for this, and talking to them and trying to get those perspectives in a book written in a way that's going to connect with people. I just, as a compliment, I think you did a hell of a job. Like, I breezed through the book. I felt like an old friend was just yapping at me over drinks. It was a really easy read.
No, that's a great compliment. Something that I love. My favorite thing is when people that don't like anything about Star Trek. A friend of mine was like, "I really don't like Star Trek, but reading the book makes me feel like I'm hanging out with you." And I was like, "Well, that's mission accomplished. Like, if you don't like Star Trek, maybe you will understand it more. Yeah, I mean, the whole goal, I appreciate that, Dag. The whole goal with the book was to do something that people like you and Jay would say, okay, I learned something, or I got a new perspective on something, or I have something new to talk about with Trek, but even though you both know it backwards and forwards. But also to, like, yeah, hand the book to, like, you know, your friend or your relative who doesn't know anything. My editor at Penguin, Jill Schwartzman, was like, look, I've seen a handful of episodes. You need to sell this to me. You know, you need to make this make sense to me.
Yeah.
And that was a really good challenge, because then it wasn't like, I knew that if there was anything that wasn't making sense, that Jill would be like, I don't know who this is. You need to explain this. And I'm like, if you can't explain Star Trek, you know, in 400 pages to somebody who's never seen Star Trek, then maybe Star Trek doesn't deserve to be explained. You know,
that's difficult.
Yeah.
So, but it's hard. But I was like, yeah. And so, like, I've said this before, but like one book that I really liked that came out in 2017 was called Dreaming the Beatles by Rob Sheffield. And I was like, why does the world need another book about the Beatles, right? But I love Rob. He's a great critic. He writes for Rolling Stone. And I loved his other books. And I just thought it was just a fantastic book. And I was like, this is why, because he made it relevant again. And so I don't know if I pulled that off with my Trek book. I hope I did. But I was inspired by books like that, where you just go, okay, here's a new, and you know, a lot of that, we were talking about previous generations, is that we're all about the same age. We're kind of what Frakes would call the real next generation. Right. And he said that to me on multiple occasions. Like, yeah, you were the next generation, literally, because you were kids who watched the next generation. Mike McMahon, who's the showrunner of Lower Decks, he's like that. He's our age. Yeah. Right. And so, not that there's anything wrong with being older or younger or anything like that, but I just think that up until now, most Trek books that are history books have been written by people in previous generations. They're older. You know, I'm friends with those guys, Mark Altman, Ed Gross, Mark Cushman, who wrote These Were the Voyages books I interviewed for this book. Those guys were all like OG, right? Like, they were there. Yeah. They remember the 70s. And I'm like, well, I wasn't born in the 70s. Right. I was born in 81. You know what I mean? So, like, I wasn't alive, you know? And so I think that for us, you know, I think that was something that was important for me, is that I'm 40, but I'm still significantly younger than the people that have written the previous Star Trek history books. Oh, yeah. So I thought that was, and also I like the new shows, and you don't always find that with some of the older fans. And I thought it was important to say the new shows exist; they're part of this. You know what I mean? And so yeah, that was the accessibility came probably from a generational thing, a little bit. And even when I talked to Michael Chabon, you know, who I've talked to a couple times, who's, you know, brilliant novelist, who was co-creator of Picard and was showrunner for Picard season 1, I kind of talked to him about how, do you think that Star Trek is always kind of critiquing its previous generation and its new iterations? And he was kind of like, yeah, we didn't intend that, but I see what you mean. You know what I mean? Because he was kind of like, you know, he was a fan who went to conventions in the 70s. So, you know, like, he's like, yeah, he's like, I can see why you would have that take. And I think you see that with Lower Decks, with Mike McMahon, and to an extent with, like, people like Henry Alonzo Meyer, who's the showrunner for Strange New Worlds. They're kind of like in between, and they're making, I think, a show for, you know, with a slightly younger sensibility.
Right on. In regards to Phasers on Stun, was there anything that you had to leave out that you're upset about?
Yeah, I did a long interview. You guys ever read Starlog magazine when you were kids?
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
yeah,
I did.
So, I did a long interview with Carrie O'Quinn, who was the founder of Starlog, because Starlog was founded as a Star Trek magazine. Yep. And it came out in '76, before Star Wars, and that was interesting to me, because it was a mainstream publication that was a magazine that was, like, sold alongside other magazines, and it was sort of demonstrative of the power of Star Trek fandom in magazines. But it just got a little too in the weeds for the book. Like, I couldn't fit it in, because I already had so much on the fandom in the 70s that it felt like it would end up being like 2 sentences and then not really worth it. Yeah. And it was just something that I just felt like I wanted to do more about publishing in general, like Star Trek books and stuff like that, because that was also a big part of it in the 90s. about how dominant Star Trek was. And I've said this before, but like, you would go into the not even the bookstore, like those book racks in the grocery store.
Yep.
And you'd have like 3 Star Trek novels, you know what I mean, all the time, and then they were always different. And I think that really was a bellwether of how much power it had that people sort of didn't acknowledge and still don't. It's like today, people act like Star Trek's behind the 8 ball, like with, San Diego Comic-Con. It's like Star Trek's always kind of playing second fiddle to Marvel and Star Wars or whatever, and it's always kind of like, yeah, but the 90s, it was like literally, that was it.
That was the golden age.
That was it. You know what I mean? You didn't have tons
the
of Star
toys,
Wars. Yeah,
the comics.
Right. You didn't, and Star Wars didn't really get into that renaissance until like 96, 97, like in the special edition era. But it was like, yeah, in like the early to mid 90s, it was Star Trek dominating whatever represented science. There were no Star Wars conventions in the 90s, right? They were Star Trek conventions.
Yeah.
And sometimes people that were like on Highlander would also join the convention or whatever, Sequest or whatever else was on, right? And be like, oh, we also have someone from Sliders here. You know what I mean? I went to
War
those
of the World.
Sequest.
Right. Yeah. Or like whatever the other 90s shows. I'm trying to think of like Time Tracks. You know what I mean? Like the hilarious Babylon 5.
Dude, Time Tracks. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I think there's a Harv Bennett connection with Time Tracks. I'm not sure. I need to look that up. But anyway, my point is yeah, I don't remember what my point was.
Happens to us all the time.
Things we left out, man. Starlog was a big part of it.
Things that we left out. Yeah, the Starlog was something I left out because it didn't feel like it fit the thesis enough. I felt like I was trying to say, like, it was like Star Trek changed the world, and it's like, here's this magazine that the casual reader may never have heard of. Care about this, and I just felt like someone like my wife who likes Star Trek, but sometimes it's like, who's Q again? I feel like she'd be like, I don't know why you spent 3,000 words on Starlog magazine.
Yeah.
And my editor too. My editor's like, so that's something I'm sad was cut though.
That's right.
I get that. With Starlog, you can say it all in about a paragraph. It's like juicing your resume.
Yeah.
You're proficient in Excel or other made up words.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. It would have been like, oh, are you still not convinced that 35,000 people in New York City were amazing? Well, what about this magazine you've never heard of? It's almost like it undercuts it. Only 1,000 people went to San Diego Comic-Con in 1970, but 4,000 went to the Star Trek convention, and also a magazine you've never heard of. Yeah, so
you can't. Even when Toys R Us was still around, you could not go to Walmart, Target, Toys R Us, nowhere, and see any Star Trek. Like very, very small representation that Star Trek has had just in the public area. Just the water cooler in regards to memorabilia, and it's a shame. It really is. So. And
now I have a gold Romulan warbird.
Ooh, you got a Dederadex. Where'd you get that?
Just thinking about memorabilia and stuff like that. I did not actually place that there for this podcast. No, I did not.
I'm not home, so I would show you a lot of my stuff, but I still have my Picard, my Playmates Picard, and Geordi, and
I've got a tote. I've got a tote about 8 feet away from me that has all of my props for the Star Trek role-playing game that occasionally gets streamed. And I've got tricorders and phasers and everything from those eras.
You're talking about the new role-playing game, Star Trek Adventures?
Yeah.
I wrote a little tiny bit for Star Trek Adventures.
Oh.
I did a little tiny bit in the Alpha Quadrant source book. Yeah. I got to write like a log and like Tuvok writing Janeway.
That's so cool.
The money was not great, but I really enjoyed it.
I mean, Modifius is on the lower end of things.
It was great. It was great. But I did a thing where Ro, after she's joined the Maquis, is like telling Chakotay not to trust Tuvok. Because she thinks he's an undercover spy, which of course he is.
Of course she would know. She can detect the Federation.
Ro was ex-Starfleet as well, right? So Ro would be hip to that.
We can smell our own.
Yeah. I think it's like don't trust that Vulcan Chakotay. I don't know what I did. But
Ryan originally wanted her as the Bajoran that was on DS9.
Oh yeah.
Ryan,
I remember reading about that in Starlog.
I've I've got a question of favorites for you. I know we're running short on time, and we'll do shout-outs in just a minute.
We can go to 3. It's okay.
3
o'clock. 15 more minutes.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Cool.
Okay.
So for favorites, do you have a favorite episode, a favorite series, and a favorite character in Star Trek?
Picking a favorite episode is so hard.
It's almost like the next 15 minutes to figure this out.
I know. You almost want to pick it from each show, but that's difficult. I'll start with saying that I think that Spock's my favorite character. He just is. I think Spock contains so many multitudes of different human experiences. He's representative of so many different human conflicts and things that people go through, which is great because he's half human. He's not completely human. I love that you like Sherlock Holmes. I love that he can be played by different people in a way that works, in a way that I don't know if it works with other Star Trek characters. You know what I mean?
I don't know if Data could be played by anybody else. If I think about that.
Yeah,
but it hasn't happened yet.
Who knows? At the same time, like I interviewed Brent Spiner last year, and he was like pitching like Daniel Craig to play young Patrick Stewart, and then you look at pictures of Patrick Stewart with a little bit of hair, and you're like, oh yeah, actually that would work.
Well,
that would actually be fine.
I've seen mock-ups of Tom Hiddleston as Data. And Tom Hiddleston as Data.
Kind of works, yeah. Well, and it's also like if they were like, we're gonna bring back Tom Hardy and do a 2350 Stargate.
He's gonna be like, no. I
would watch the shit out of that. Like,
I know, I would too,
Tom
but he
Hardy
would not.
back as Picard. Yeah, no, he would never do it. Of course.
We promise, no makeup and no skin-tight vinyl bug suit.
But I mean, he would be so. Imagine just like a period piece where they film it just like The Wrath of Khan, because that era of uniforms is on the Stargazer, and it's just Tom Hardy just kicking ass.
Tom Hardy's gonna be like, screw you guys, all right.
That could have been
hell.
That could have been a season of Picard season, middle season. It's just Tom Hardy.
See, and in season 1, they teased some Stargazer stuff in season 1, and it would have been neat to see some flashbacks.
Yeah, and in season 2 they teased it too. Yeah. Anyway, well, I think that my favorite episode, I'm going to go ahead and say, I've said this before, but in the original series is A Taste of Armageddon. And that's the one where they roll up on the planet where the computers fight their wars for them.
The War Games one.
Yeah.
And we just randomly kill the populace.
I just love that one. I love how it's like, I love the irony that Kirk uses on them. Like, I'm going to show you how much of a barbarian I can be, And then that speech at the end is so famous, where he's talking about how we don't have to kill today. And I don't know if you guys like For All Mankind, the Apple show.
I have to see that show so bad.
Well, it's Ron Moore. It's Ron Moore. Deep Space Nine, Battlestar Galactica.
It's
Ron Moore.
I haven't heard.
But there's a character. It's an alternate history astronaut show. But there's a character played by Chris Marshall named Danielle Poole, and she becomes the first. In this alternate timeline, she becomes the first black woman in space. And she quotes from A Taste of Armageddon. And because in the context of the show, it's like it's an alternate 80s, and so she's a Star Trek fan within the context of that. And I remember talking to Ron Moore about that, and he was like, I didn't put that. He's like, I put a lot of Star Trek references in the show. I didn't put that one in. The other writers put that one in. But I just love how much that episode embodies so much of what Star Trek is about. Is there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of drama, and there's a lot of philosophy, and there's a really kind of like out there sci-fi idea that is sort of crammed into 45 minutes, and I just love it. It's just fantastic. So that would be it. And then show, I am just gonna say right now, just because I've seen a big chunk of Lower Decks season 3. I'm just gonna say Lower Decks.
Oh man,
I just love Lower Decks.
I'm so jealous, man. That's such a great gig.
Yes.
I can't. All I'll say.
Sign me up.
Here's all I'll say, and this is something that.
Spoiler alert.
This is not a spoiler. This has been said at San Diego by the cast, by the creator and showrunner Mike McMahon. The Deep Space Nine episode is real. It is a real Deep Space Nine episode. It is not just flying around the station. It is a Deep Space Nine episode.
Yeah,
so that's all I'll say.
They can't tease us with Tarak Noor, and I mean just the method that McMahon puts into the promos. You just know if he teases a little bit, you're gonna get a lot.
it's a great season.
Pop quiz. Do you know how to tell it when it's Terok Nor?
How? I don't know.
It's tilted.
Oh yeah,
tilted when you look at.
or it's by Bajor, right? It would be in orbit of Bajor.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, anyway, but
oh no, I'm thinking Empok Nor. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Empok Nor's that's the
crap.
yeah.
The designers of Empok Nor were like, all right, Terok Nor, Empok Nor.
Just tilt it.
And the legates were just like, yes,
32 degrees.
This is very good. Thank you. Yes, very good.
All right, Big J screwed up. Sorry. Yeah. God dang it.
Ryan, what are you doing soon? I hear you're going to be at New York Comic Con.
Yeah, I'm going to go to New York Comic Con. I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing. I have some panels on submission. I'm buddies with Chase Masterson. She blurred my book. She did a really lovely interview.
Her organization is so great.
Pop Culture Hero Coalition. Yeah. Chase works on bullying prevention with kids by using pop culture stories, including Trek. So I'm hoping to do something with Chase. We're buddies. We used to do a Discovery podcast together. And hoping to talk about my book a little bit. I lived in New York for a long time, so it's kind of home turf for me. I love New York Comic Con. It's so much fun. So I'm in October planning to be at New York Comic Con doing stuff with my book. I'm working on a book about Dune right now. That's really challenging. It's very same tone as the Trek book, as Phasers on Stun. It's called The Spice Must Flow. The Journey of Dune comes out next fall, if I hit all my deadlines. That's like it's if the Star Trek book was about change and radical revision, then the Dune book is about contradictions. And sort of like how contradictions and like can fuel like a sort of like, and also about something that is both extremely underground but also extremely mainstream at the same time, which Trek has a little bit of as well. So the research for that is very different than the Trek book.
Well, there's now 3 cinematic interpretations of Dune?
4 if you count the second miniseries on the Sci-Fi Channel Children's.
Yeah, there's a miniseries.
See, that's the one I am counting. So what am I missing? I've got the '80s one with Patrick Stewart, the Sci-Fi Channel one, and
Kyle MacLachlan
that just came out.
There's
last
two.
year.
There's 2 Sci-Fi Channel ones. That's the thing.
Oh.
There's a 2000 miniseries that's just Dune with Alec Newman. Alec Newman, who played a genetically engineered Superman on Star Trek Enterprise. Yes, Alec Newman played Paul Atreides. I just talked to Alec Newman for like an hour last week, and he loves Star Trek. I was talking to him about Dune and for my book, and we were talking a lot about. And then he did Enterprise right after Children of Dune. Which was in 2003, so then he would have filmed Enterprise, that was an 2005 episode.
Right.
But yeah, he was talking about how he still talks to Brent Spiner and how he's like, I would do Star Trek again in a second.
I've got a question for you. And this is probably just me being stupid, but how is Dune so popular? The way you talk about it seems like you're going to spend time writing a book about it. You spend time writing a book about Star Trek, but there is such a large volume of Star Trek to talk about. And for me, it seems like with Dune, you've got 2 movies and 2 sci-fi series, limited run series. I don't see how that stacks up.
It doesn't stack up. It's not the same. It's much smaller. So I think writing about Star Trek is like writing about the Beatles. Writing about Dune is like writing about an indie rock band. You know what I mean? So that would be so the scale is definitely different in a book like this.
Why would you torture yourself with a book based on that so little material?
Well, there's a lot more material than you think. There were 6 original books that he wrote. And there's also 30 spin-off books. And there's also this impending HBO miniseries, assuming that happens. But beyond that, what the book is mostly about in the middle anyway is the influence. No Dune, no Star Wars. Period. There's no Star Wars without Dune. No Dune, maybe no Patrick Stewart on The Next Generation.
Oh, okay.
No Dune, no Kyle MacLachlan working with David Lynch for all those extremely important and influential David Lynch movies.
I get where you're going.
So there is something, it's a vector for many things. And I think that that's really interesting. It's also Children of Dune, the third book in the series, was the first science fiction hardcover bestseller ever.
Nice. Okay.
Like New York Times bestseller. There had never been a hardcover science fiction book on the New York Times bestseller until the third Dune book.
Wow.
Which is like the search for Spock of Dune.
Yeah.
Or like, I don't know, the Return of the Jedi or something. You know, it's not one of the more popular ones. But it's the end of the sort of trilogy that is accepted as being good. But so the thing is that it's very influential. It was also a book that broke out of the, like Star Trek was mainstream. Like Star Trek just wasn't popular among science fiction fans. The Dune books are extremely popular among non-science fiction fans and remain so. And it was almost like Star Trek, kind of isolated from the science fiction community, the literary science fiction community. And there's a lot of politics and environmentalism in the way that it was created, and that is tied up in the 60s. And so the 60s are a really interesting time for science fiction to change. So there's actually some interesting overlaps with Trek. Like Frank Herbert was one of the authors that Harlan Ellison got to sign the first petition to NBC to keep Trek on the air. So there's like this weird sort of intersection of when science fiction stops being kind of conservative and then it starts being, the new wave comes with all, you know, Ursula Le Guin and Harlan Ellison and you know, a lot of the people that wrote for Trek, Theodore Sturgeon, etc. And Herbert's Dune is sort of like the big part of that. So it is the most mainstream underground thing simultaneously. So it's nothing like Star Trek. But it is, it's like I said, it's like an indie band that somehow everybody knows about. And so that's sort of what the book is. It'll be a little shorter than the Trek book. It won't be as long. It'll probably be, the Trek book is about 100,000 words. This will probably be about 75.
I like when you talked about it being a vector. That's a good angle to look at it. That without Dune, you wouldn't have these different branches of things that came later.
Also, nobody's actually done what I'm doing. Like with the Star Trek book, people have tried to do the entire history of Star Trek before. Nobody's done a book that says, we're going to start with Herbert and his novels. We're going to start with the short stories, or the way the Dune was published was serialized, and people don't know that. And the differences are really weird. And then we're going to go through the first novel, and then we're going to go through that, and then we're going to go to the Lynch Mill, but nobody's done it. So that's the other thing. That's the other challenge, is it's kind of like, well, nobody's done this. There will be some version of it which will be a lot less fun. I might as well do the fun version.
Someone's gonna do it. Might as well.
Somebody's gonna do it, and it's gonna be boring. And so I'm gonna do the version of it that's not boring. That's my answer.
That's amazing. I can't wait to see what you have in store for us coming out next year.
Yeah, next fall.
But Phasers on Stun is on sale now.
Yes.
And anybody anywhere, if you want to get like just 400 pages of the absolute everything you ever wanted to know about Star Trek, I would highly recommend picking up a copy. If you have a Trekkie in your life who annoys you with, I don't know why you'd be watching this podcast if Trekkies annoyed you, but I mean, get that friend this book, because they're gonna learn something. I did, and I'm gonna reread it because I'm sure I glossed over some stuff. There's that whole scene with DeForest Kelley in the hotel room that I was just like, man, you know how to set a scene, dude. I got like super noir vibes. I'm expecting Cagney to walk in any second.
Well, I researched all that comes from Joan Winston, who was one of the first fan organizers. She had all these great essays that she wrote about hanging out with them, and when you pour through them, you can create kind of a composite of what happened. So it's just like
that's another thing. I was saying that's another thing that really impressed me is the breadth of detail you went to find. You're referencing like a 1994 edition of TV Guide, which I actually have in a tote back there. It's just, you were better than detail oriented on this. Just it was great.
eBay is my friend. I love eBay.
Yeah.
I love finding. I love, like, my wife is always like, "Is this a research eBay cost?" And I'm like, "Everything kind of is, like everything I buy on eBay is kind of for research."
My greatest fear
Tax
is that
deduction.
Well,
my greatest fear is that I pass away and my wife sells my stuff for what I told her it cost.
Yeah, I love that, Jay. Unfortunately, I have to say, what you will find when you are married is you have a joint bank account is you can't hide. It's like, what? She's like, why was this $50? And I'm like, well,
it was
old.
a book.
It's old. It's out of print. I need it. But oftentimes I did. Those TV guides are not as cheap as you think.
Mm-hmm.
You think,
right.
oh, they're probably like, what do you think? They're probably like $2. Not so. Sometimes they're like $15-$20, And I'm like, I had this when I was a kid. Why did I not keep it?
I've got there was a series that was like the 4 issues that were for the same week but had the different shows. I've got all 4 of those. And then there was one that came out in 2004 that was like the top 25 science fiction shows of all time. I've got that one.
Wow, TV guide.
The Avery Brooks interview that I use a little bit of was from a TV guide. It wasn't like super expensive, but it wasn't like dirt cheap either. It was kind of like, but I need it, because it was like it was like the first big interview that Brooks had did with TV Guide had done at that time, and I remembered it from being a kid as him being a little cagey, which he was famously very, he just didn't take any shit from these people. You know what I mean? Like, he's just such a direct, interesting person. And, it's hard. I mean, Ira Stephen Bear didn't get Avery Brooks to do new interview material for the Deep Space Nine documentary. Yeah. They used archival material. Yeah. Brooks does not do interviews, right? The last interview he did was with Shatner for the captains.
Like, even on set, he everybody who wasn't Cirroc Lofton or Penny Gerald Johnson referred to him as Mr. Brooks.
Right. So, but my point is that if you want some of that stuff, and Avery Brooks is alive, but you're not going to get a new interview with him. But if you want some of that stuff with Trek, sometimes you can't get those folks either because they're not doing interviews or they're not around anymore. And so you got to find the old interviews. Yeah. You know what I mean? And sometimes you find the stuff on Wikipedia and you'll find something quoted, and then you'll find the actual article that it's inside of, and it's just completely different. Yeah. And the one quote that Wikipedia has pulled out is like, that's not really representative of what they meant at all.
Out of context completely.
Yeah, and I'm not doing straight transcripts or anything like that. I'm putting my own spin on it. I've got my own weird angles on it too. But I think that I'm in this process with Dune right now of like calling research libraries and having them scan letters and stuff like that. And being like, oh, that's where that quote comes from. That's weird. It's just completely out of context on this other article. And then millions of books quote it over and over and over again. You know what I mean? This is true of musicians and stuff like too. You read, interviews with Tupac or John Lennon, and it'll be like the one thing gets quoted over and over again, but then you read the original interview and you're like, this is way better. So that's why I like the research process is fun in that way, but it can be a hall of mirrors. You know what I mean? Because you could be like, well, I could use all of this. Yeah. But you can't. You got to figure out what you're going to use. But yeah, I love getting. It's a thrill when you buy something on eBay that's like really not rare, but like rare to you, and you're like, oh, now I've got it.
Oh man, you got to check out. And this is not a promo. I'm not paid for that by these people, but you got to check out shopgoodwill.com Star Trek stuff.
Really,
I have a favorite section that goes for pages of just people throwing up like, here's my gold-plated Eagle Moss Enterprise. Somebody turned this in. Because it's Goodwill people, they're not going to do the intensive research. Like right now, there's a case of gold badges from the series that's on there.
Wow, it's on Goodwill?
It's like $150 right now, but that's it. And it's
you don't know what you got.
People don't know what they have, or they get rid of it because they move and they really don't need it. But to somebody else, it's just I have to have.
I have to get going in a second. But do you guys remember? The Circle K Deep Space Nine cups that were from the comics?
No. That's amazing. Do you
Maybe
have
it was
one?
7-Eleven. No, I don't. So Malibu Comics, which was I think it was an independent comic publisher at the time. For some reason, Deep Space Nine comics were not published by DC initially, even though DC had the Trek license at the time.
Right.
Deep Space Nine was published by Malibu Comics, and they had these great artwork of like all the cast and stuff like that from season 1. This is like season 1 Deep Space Nine. So like, and there was these really big Slurpee cups that came out, and it was either 7-Eleven or Circle K. Anyway, they're really expensive on eBay. My sister and I had all of them. There was like 4 cups. They were really great. They were just like really beautiful artwork of like just the whole crew, and like, you know, one was like a casting, one was like close-ups of the faces of like Cisco and Dax, and those were great. I wish I still had those.
That's
I know I had to see it because this was 90s and Star Trek was everywhere.
It was like 93. It was like right when it came out. It was like right when Deep Space Nine came out. I remember I was still riding my bike. You know what I mean? To like go to like, I gotta get the new Deep Space Nine cup.
Generation these days,
you're literally
like, what's a bike?
talking about this Malibu poster that I have conveniently on my desk from the first episode.
But that's the style of artwork. Yeah, from that era.
Totally not scripted.
And then by 96, Marvel was doing the comics, which is just bananas. And those comics are really. I talked to one of the writers, Chris Cooper, in the book about that. But yeah,
Ryan, thank you so much for meeting with us today. Really appreciate your time. Do you have any socials that you want to shout out? People want to ask questions.
Sure, Twitter is probably the easiest way to find me. That's like where all my professional stuff goes. So just Ryan C Britt on Twitter, 2 T's. Same thing on Instagram. I'm Ryan.Britt on Instagram. But yeah, Twitter's the best way. That's where I put all my articles and interviews and stuff.
Right on. And for those of you listeners, you can always find us at Beyond Trek Pod on Twitter. I'm at Trek Nexus. And thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us, for the audience for being here, and for always going boldly with Beyond Trek Podcast. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our Patreon and Anchor supporters, to S. Tam and Nora Hickson. Thank you so much for being a part of Beyond Trek Podcast.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your years. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.